rumbles, it's World Rally Blue, and it's a wide body, making this one of the best Subaru STIs ever built. Welcome back, guys, or if you're new to my channel, this is Automotive Anonymous, and that's a 2014 Subaru WRX STI in World Rally Blue. It's a hatchback, and I think it might be the coolest STI ever built. So today I get to share the good, the bad, and the ugly of this iconic hatchback STI to help you guys at home decide if this might be worth your time and money, so you can expect to see a walk around, all the specs, initial driving impressions, 0 to 60 on GPS, and then my final thoughts. And huge thanks to Twin Falls Subaru for letting me borrow this one for the day. I'll link it below if you're interested. Otherwise, let's dive right in with this review. If you like World Rally Blue, the Subaru Boxer Rumble, or my video, please consider liking my video. That small act of kindness really goes a long way. It tells me that you want to see more stuff like this, but also helps you by having YouTube show you more stuff like this. Thank you, guys. But if you're new to the WRX STI, you really need to know that that nameplate first came out as a trim level off of the Impreza back in 1994, but it was only sold primarily to the European countries. It wasn't until 2002 that the first one showed up on American shorelines. Thankfully, Subaru decided to still have them assembled in Japan, where the craftsmen took a lot of pride in putting these cars together, and that one was the Bug-Eye iteration. But this is really special for quite a few reasons, and it's the last year of the Impreza-based STI, which this third generation spanned between 08 to 2014. But the really cool thing is they were only offered with a 5-speed manual if it was the WRX, a 6-speed beefed up manual if it was the STI, and they had the hatchback. It was the last year of the hatchback because since the WRX became its own model in 2015 versus just a trim level prior to that, it no longer is offered with the hatchback because it's no longer part of the Impreza family. And this third generation that spanned between 08 to 2014, it was refreshed as a wide body from 2011 to 2014. So the 11 to 14s are really the one that you want and the ones that a lot of people desire. But back in 2014, if you were to buy one of these, the base STI MSRP started at about $37,000, which was roughly $47,000, $48,000 today. So it wasn't cheap by any stretch of the imagination. That was only about $10,000 less than maybe a Corvette at the time, a base level. But what you got if you bought the STI was about 40 more horsepower over the base WRX. You got an extra gear, and the 6-speed transmission in this one was beefier. It could hold more power. You also got a stiffer suspension and a few other upgrades that basically just make this the more track-focused car. And while they were pretty popular, while we do see quite a few of them on the road, they only sold 25,000 units in this final iteration of the third generation. So there's not a ton of them out there, all things considered. They are getting harder to find because they've been out for a while. A lot of people are keeping them pristine. Some people are driving them. Some people are treating them like rally cars. But this example with 60,000 miles, it honestly looks like it's almost brand new off the showroom floor, so whoever owned it before has really taken good care of it. And these are actually pretty practical, especially around town and city driving, because they're only 14.5 feet long. The wheelbase is about 8.5 feet, so it's pretty planted and stable on the road. They're roughly 6 feet wide and about 4.8 feet tall because the overall Subaru body is not super high lifted, even though it is an all-wheel drive car. It weighs about 3,400 pounds, which was kind of heavy back then, but by today's standards, that's honestly really light, and it does feel pretty nimble on the road. Its payload capacity is 900 pounds though, so you can only hold 900 pounds worth of your favorite people and stuff in this one. The ground clearance is about 5.9 inches, so unless you have a big diameter exhaust hanging down underneath, I do think that that's pretty good ground clearance, and you probably don't have to be too overly cautious going up speed bumps and into driveways. And then it can do a full circle in about 35 feet, which is fairly agile for a vehicle like this. The last couple things to mention here is the gas door is located right there on the passenger side, and it locks. There's a switch to unlock it on the inside, so the bums can't attempt to siphon any of your 16.9 gallons of premium fuel. But this unfortunately is only rated for 17 city, 23 highway, so your max road trip and range is only 388, and that's if you stay out of the boost pressure. And then it has a square stance, so it's a 245, 4018. It does look like the previous owner had a little bit of curb rash, or someone did in the last 10 years. But overall, those wheels look really good, and you could have those touched up. There are STI brakes. The front are larger than the rear, but they do a really good job to slow you down. And then this is your basic key. It's a physical key. You have lock, unlock, and then the trunk release, but it's not a power liftgate. So you do have to pull that thing out of your pocket to lock and unlock it, or just use the buttons. The driver's side door panel, it's all black, it's held up really well, but it is a lot of cheaper Impreza type of materials, at least you have a little bit of a leather patch for your elbow and some Hobby Lobby red stitching. Decent handle of your buttons, your controls, your speakers, which are not fantastic, but this is, you know, based off the Impreza, and it's 10 years old, so we can't knock it too much. Bottle holder, pretty wide snack pocket, which I appreciate. You have STI on the aluminum door sill, and then you have aluminum foot pedals that are kind of hybridized. There's a little bit of rubber inserts on them. You have the hood release, the OBD2 port, your fuse box, traction control, lighting, mirrors and lighting, ventilation, the Cobb tuner, lighting stock, and then you have your manually adjusted leather Alcantara seats, which have more red stitching. They feel pretty good. They have enough bolstering for this type of car for street use, and then STI embroidered in the headrest. Sitting inside the STI is honestly really rewarding, especially from the driver position. So despite, you know, all the cheap plastics, it actually is a really cool place to be because you have the Cobb tuner, you have a boost gauge, you have your big blue hood scoop coming through the windshield, but then you also have STI on the steering wheel, and it's also going to pop up inside there when you honk the horn. It's the basic Impreza horn, so nothing fancy there, but put the key in the ignition, make sure the shifter's in neutral, foot on the clutch and the brake, and fire it up. The needles dance, the boxer roars to life. And the STI display appears. Otherwise, I think the whole visual setup here and the audio, you know, response from the box in the back is seriously so cool, so unique. But otherwise, it's a leather-wrapped wheel, not heated or anything on this old school generation. But you have mode and volume over here. You can do your call settings and your voice control there. And then cruise, not adaptive or eyesight or anything. This one does have an aftermarket, you know, audio display. You still have the basic second display up there. And then ventilation, climate controls, 12-volt, rubberized mat storage that actually goes pretty far into there. And then you have the shifter, which the shifter actually is pretty notchy for, I would say, a hatchback. It's not as good as my Miata, my 23 Club, but for this type of vehicle, it's really good. And the 6-speed in this versus the 5-speed in the WRX is pretty good. Manual e-brake. It feels really light pulling it up. I'm not sure if it's just aged and could be tightened, or if that's just because this is an Impreza at the heart of it. And then you have more mode select, your center diff controls, you have your heated seats, you have some storage for your bottles, your snacks, and then you have a little bit of storage in here with some plugins, which is pretty cool. Otherwise, you have garage door settings, your compass, auto-dimming mirrors, you have a little bit of incandescent lighting up here, and no lighting right here or above it, which I find interesting. And does it slide? No, it does not. But with that said, let's turn it off and let's hop in the back. The rear passenger side door panel looks like it was designed by the same people. All the materials are in uniform with the front. Nothing on the door sill though. You don't even have aluminum down there, which is unfortunate. But you do have a really nice bench. And can we lower it? We can. 40 and 60 split. But you can see the size of the Impreza. You'd have to take the headrest off or move the driver's seat forward to really get it to lay down. But you do have some decent storage and access to the hatch area from back here. Otherwise, at 5'11", I do have my seat fairly far back right now, but there's a little bit of room and about that much room above my head, so I could be comfortable back here for a while. I don't have any cup holders or center armrest or anything, and there's a lot of dark materials back here with the red accents every once in a while on the stitching, but overall it's not too bad, and thankfully at least the seat is comfortable for my knees to push into if they need to. The back of the STI hatch in this blue color really looks pretty good, and I think a lot of the Evo owners who have been forced to look at it over the years have probably enjoyed it. But there's only a couple main ways to get into the hatch. You can either climb through the back seats, you could push the button on the remote to unlock it, but it's not a power lift gate, so ultimately you're just gonna have to push the button that's underneath the Subaru emblem to lift it up anyways. The shocks could probably be replaced because that was a little bit of work, and it does open fairly high, but low enough that it's gonna fit into most garages, I would say. Back here, you have about 19 cubic feet of cargo capacity. When you drop the seats, you actually have about 44. So it is less than a modern Crosstrek or a modern Impreza, because this vehicle from 10 years ago is not that big by today's standards. And then underneath all this extra stuff you get with it, you do have a spare tire, but it's not a full size. Otherwise, you just have incandescent lighting, a little bit of a tie down spot on each side, but there's not really a whole lot to look at. And when you have to lower it down, you do have a handle, and it lowers pretty easily. But if you get a ride shotgun in the STI, your door panel looks basically the same as all the others. You of course don't have all the controls that the driver gets, but you do have STI on the aluminum door sill plate. You have the same basic heated but non-power adjusted leather seats. The backpack's happy. STI is of course stamped in on the headrest. No transmission tunnel storage or above the glove box, but it is locking with the key. It's adequately sized, but kind of on the small side. And there's no 12 volt or plugins like some modern Subarus have. And with that said, let's come around to the front. I'm gonna pop the hood and I'm gonna show you what the 2.5 liter EJ Boxer engine looks like. Then we're gonna take it for a drive. Under the hood is the little 2.5 liter EJ Boxer engine with the unequal length headers to make that rumble sound. And it makes about 305 horsepower at 6,000 RPM and about 290 foot-pound-feet of torque at 4,000 RPM. And you actually have to rev this out to every bit of 4,000 RPM to start feeling the boost pressure hit and actually start really moving out of its own way. Because before 4,000 RPM, it feels like an old school turbo, which is very much a 4-cylinder until all this boost pressure hits out of nowhere and your power is basically doubled. But Subaru did a really good job designing this. Functionally, air comes through the grille, through the filter, the baffling, the piping, the plumbing, through the turbo. Then it comes around to be cooled by the intercooler, which has functional air, cold air coming through to blow on it to cool it down before the throttle body and the upper intake runners. Otherwise though, a lot of the top level surface maintenance items are gonna be super easy to do because you can access all of your reservoirs, your battery, your alternator, your serpentine belts, they're both right there. Heck, you can even see the block on the Subaru, but it is really tight for being an Impreza model. It's not, there's not a lot of periphery room around it like there is on a Subaru Ascent or an Outback. It's definitely snug in here, and spark plugs and some of those deeper maintenance items would probably honestly suck to have to work on. But overall, a lot of the top stuff is easy to get to. And with that said, let's drop the hood, take it for a drive. Initial driving impressions of the 2014 STI wagon. Ooh, it really feels like an old school turbo. The power kicks in after 4,000 RPM, but before that, it just feels like a 4-cylinder. Especially by today's standards, it's not a super powerful 4-cylinder until the boost pressure kicks in. And we have the Subaru boost gauge up here, as you saw earlier, which is pretty darn cool. The shifter, it's not as notchy as my Miata. There's probably a little bit more for the linkage department before you actually get into the transmission. But this 6-speed feels really good and definitely feels better than the 5 speeds that the WRX variants came with. And the steering is interesting because modern Subarus have super finicky, super touchy steering. This feels really lightweight and not much is happening right here. But after that point, this feels really good and it handles really well. A little bit more boost pressure. The noises are fantastic with this Cobb intake, but even downshifting, it's not a very big engine. So although it's easy to downshift, it just doesn't really slow you down. But it goes around corners fast. Yeah, the power really kicks in just below 4,000 RPM. 305 horse, 290 torque, that's not a lot, but it's enough to have some fun. It's enough to have a lot of fun on the streets. I think this would really shine on a track, but it just seems so playful and at only, 3,400 pounds? It does a good job. Even these seats are holding the backpack and I in pretty well. I like that they're STI embroidered on the top. They're not as aggressive as like a Recaro, but overall the driving experience of this is good. Visibility is fantastic. It's based off of the Impreza, so what do you expect? But it has all the fancy bits, the fancy features. There should be a bump coming up pretty soon, so we'll see how the suspension feels. But honestly guys, for being a 10-year-old Subaru Impreza that's loaded out in the STI trim, I think this is a really good car. Here's the bump. Ooh, that did not feel very good. It did sound worse than it felt inside, but still the stiff suspension of the STI. It did not absorb that like a modern Outback, Crosstrek, Forest, or anything like that. And let me have you guys listen to that turbo spool one more time, and then we'll get to the private road and do a 0 to 60. And keep in mind, a little bit after this video comes out, I will post a longer driving impressions video just because this is too fun to give up. Not full throttle, but still, it sounds fantastic, and that Boxer rumble is worth whatever you're gonna have to pay to acquire that. The unequal length header really sounds good. And with that said, let's get to the private road and do a 0 to 60. And true 0 to 60 came in at 6.59 seconds, and that was with pretty easy shifting, pretty light launch. Density altitude's over 4,000 feet, so even though this is turboed, it's still down on power, probably about 7 or 8%. So, given all those facts, you know, that really wasn't that bad. My final thoughts of the 2014 Subaru Impreza WRX STI in World Rally Blue with the Subaru Boxer Rumble is that's a lot of words, that's a lot of stuff that describes exactly what this hatchback wide-body WRX STI wagon is. This, in my opinion, is maybe the coolest WRX STI ever made. There's no longer a wagon. It's built off the Impreza, so it was a little bit cheaper at the time, especially compared to what this would probably cost to produce now. It has more cargo capacity than the sedan. It has more characteristics between the exterior, the audio. You know, just hearing the turbo inlet noise coming on, especially around 4,000 RPM, it's unlike anything else. Most modern cars are so sophisticated and stable and not fun, basically. This feels really raw, even though the power level isn't crazy. You could always do a 500 horsepower closed deck IAG block. You could build it to whatever you want. There's a lot of fast WRX STIs all over the world, especially that live here on YouTube. But do I recommend it? Heck yeah. Do I think you should be well aware of what you're buying and make sure that it was well maintained and taken care of by someone who's gonna care about it as much as you? Heck yeah. This one honestly looks really clean. I think the dealership's asking around $28,000 for it, so about half of the value that it was brand new 10 years ago. And I think it could be worth every part of that, especially if this is what you're looking for. But like always, I'm just a random guy on YouTube. I recommend you test drive everything. Plug the numbers in for yourself, KBB it, do all the things to make sure that you're buying the right car for you and you're getting the right deal. And with that said, if you guys like my video, please consider liking my video. Comment your thoughts and opinions below. Subscribe if you haven't already. I wish you guys the best. I hope you come back again. And I'm gonna post a longer driving impressions video of this in the next few weeks or months at some point down the road. So until then, take care.